Ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Fortinet session. I'm your host, Chris Dorn with XenTegra, and today we're looking at covering the topic of FortiNAC. That's network access control. And joining us today from Fortinet is Jason Kline, one of the senior systems engineers. We also have Mohammad Akif with XenTegra and David Wynegar with XenTegra Marksman joining as well. So welcome, group and fellas. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome. So I haven't had a lot of hands-on with this product, but it apparently is like the Swiss Army knife of networks. You have visibility into the network regardless of the user device, where they join, you can control and limit where devices go on the network, automate response and speed up time to events and resolutions. So it sounds like this, and I know it's kind of a component of the Fortinet fabric if you're like end-to-end Fortinet, but then like we were chatting about before we kick this off, most organizations are not homogeneous in the vendor selection, so that we need some kind of control overlay that would be present inside of those environments. So I'll shut up for a second and let Jason introduce himself and say hey, and we can chat about this product a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So it's I started in Fortinet just about a year ago, just under a year ago. So and got introduced to FortiNAC. My background is NAC with competitive products, but I've been in the NAC space, and my background is predominantly networking, right? Networking and security. So, so I'm looking forward to hopefully answering some questions and then learning something along the way.
Awesome. So the FortiNAC, it seems like it works with a lot of different protocols. It has a discovery option. So like if I didn't know anything about it, maybe like why do I need something like this? Say like I just started at a new company, they got 15 different vendors in there, I don't know what's going where. Is this like a component that could be put into place to like help with that discovery and at the same time securing the network a little bit better?
I think you're 100% spot on, but I would probably ask a few other questions, right, if that's okay.
Sure.
And the questions would probably lead to, do you have a requirement for NAC? And many organizations do, depending on like maybe their vertical, maybe if it's for like a financial or an OT environment, and that may be a really good requirement for having something like network access control, right? To identify exactly what's on the network and then how to control it. Not every device is going to have an endpoint, maybe a EDR. We have headless devices, right? So devices that are maybe non-intelligent. So how do you protect those devices from unfortunate, maybe possible attacks, right? Reducing that surface. So NAC gives us that flexibility. And the nice thing about, especially FortiNAC, it's really irrelevant on the vendor that we're using, right, to control that. So you can be, pretty much any networking vendor, and we easily integrate and then control those network elements that are on that, right? They're on those particular, type of networks.
Gotcha. So like a lot of SNMP calls, kind of discover what's out there.
So good question. It's a good question. So there's many ways to identify what's out there, right? So we want to onboard a device like maybe via SNMP, CLI, but maybe we want to basically how do we remediate or control those devices or identify it? So maybe we use like DHCP probes, right, to identify what's on the network, because you don't really know what to control if you can't see it, right? So visibility, like you said earlier, is really like a key element to any NAC solution, right? So you have to know what's on the network before we could apply any type of policy or control, right? So again, going back to like a headless device, a good example is a private school. We were using put FortiNAC in there, and you can. It's amazing how many environmental controls we kind of identify, that's just out there in the wild, right? So, and then how now the ability to control them. So, but those are also unfortunately, they can be, a vector for an attack, right? If compromised or not controlled. So we always want to we know what's out there first before we have any type of enforcement, right? So we're able to leverage SNMP. We could use Radius, the .1x, or Mac authentication bypass or MAB. So there's many ways that we can basically control the endpoint or user, right? So if it's a user, for example, like a workstation, like maybe a Mac or a Windows device, we'll use something called a persistent agent that can be installed, and that persistent agent will identify or even identify the applications that are on the host, or where we can control how we can pivot that particular host, or user to a particular VLAN, right? So in addition, there's the ability to want to posture the device for any particular, if you're out of you don't need a policies for updates or AV or etc. You always want to be able to kind of move that endpoint to a safe or quarantine VLAN, right? To make sure you can remediate it. So there's many ways to ingest data. So if you're a workstation, you would use a passive persistent agent, or you can basically use an MDM. FortiClient EMS is an MDM, considered an MDM. Intune, right? AirWatch can actually ingest all those endpoints to start creating policies, right?
Okay.
Hey, Jason, is there a re-authentication method within the FortiNAC that allows AI-driven results for zero trust on users' network to apply either patches or quarantine, or maybe the user's out of the country and needs to now be blocked?
So if you repeat the question again, if I understood that correctly, if you want to use some sort of level of intelligence, that agent will give you that a level of intelligence. But in addition to leveraging all the other resources of the security fabric that would feed data into FortiNAC to come up with some sort of decision, right? But I believe what you said before, and then please correct me if I'm mistaken, is if you're out of the country, that's more like geo, right? Some sort of geo. Maybe if you're out of the country, you're on VPN. You might control it at the edge as well. But you could also use something called tags. There's actually these firewall tags. These firewall tags are not met. You can easily control user or even any type of network element that's going to be VPNing into your network by some sort of firewall tag.
Got it. That's the meta tags?
It's like a meta tag, yeah.
Great, thank you.
So there's kind of the agentless and there's agent-based kind of scanning to populate this, because if I just downloaded the DM and I deploy it, I got to populate it. So we got a couple options there on how to start populating the appliance itself. So it seems pretty flexible.
I think the easiest way to populate it is, at least in my opinion, DHCP, right? So if you just basically have you could easily onboard the devices and discover them, and start device profiling or classifying the devices based upon what they are, by MAC address, by vendor code, right? There's many ways of an Nmap scan. There's many ways of identifying the type of traffic or the type of device it may be. In addition to actually related to traffic is that there's session. You can integrate the FortiGates with FortiNAC, and then those sessions can actually be used as profilers to identify what the type of device is, right? So if you're, let's say, I'll go to the kind of an OT example. If you have a certain destination port meeting a certain requirement, you could profile those sessions based upon that and take an action against it, right?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm seeing here, and I'm reading just some notes on a website, not even Fortinet's website, but they're pointing out there's 17 different profiling methods. It seems
Quite a
pretty
few.
robust. Yeah.
But
Well,
So-
it's only as good as what you have inside of it. So I mean, the more the better. It's trying
Yeah.
to get that complete picture of what's going on inside of your network.
and usually it's always about like really visibility, right? So you have to, if once you gain that visibility, then you could start, you have more granular control, right? And then you'll know exactly what comes on and off your network. And that doesn't mean actually a wired or wireless. That could also be for a VPN as well. So it doesn't mean it's not always
Okay.
on premise, right?
So they really took a lot of strides to simplify that onboarding of those devices and the users inside the network. So no, that's pretty cool. So once it's populated and you kind of have everything built out, is this well, let's back up a little bit. Look at the deployment option. So is this a physical or a VM kind of based option when we're deploying it, or is there multiple?
Good question, right?
Any cloud options here?
There is actually. It's actually all three.
All three. Okay, cool.
Right, all three. So you can do a physical appliance, you can do virtual, whether it's your own private cloud or your public cloud. So you have really let's say a plethora of options, right? So you're not really limited by any particular like deployment model. So I mean, of course, it always depends on topology, right? But I would say that you work with your SE to kind of identify the best architecture and requirements that NAC will basically provide.
And is this deployed in like typically a high availability setup or in a clustering kind of solution?
It's definitely always recommended to have it in a highly available scenario, right? I mean, not that you have to, but it's definitely always recommended, right? So if you could have, for example, data center A, data center B, you can have an active unit in data center A, and then upon an event, data center B would take over. In addition to that, some networks are much larger than others. They may have, multi thousands, of users or maybe endpoints that need to be kind of monitored, and then controlled. And FortiNAC will basically give you that. But if you exceed a certain threshold of those numbers, then you would use like maybe multiple instances, like they call them like pods, right? In a particular location. So take a particular maybe region or geographical region, and you would put a pod there. So an example, maybe you'd have a pod in Florida to cover maybe your eastern region, and you have a pod in California to cover your western region. And then to manage those, you would have some like a NAC manager, right? To manage those multiple pods, right? So this way you would have centralized management to administer those, right?
So those pods would fall up underneath that hierarchy in the tree. Okay, so like when you're explaining that, I'm picturing like a Active Directory forest domain kind of hierarchy. Okay.
Good point. I think it's a good analogy. Yes.
Okay.
I'll go with it. I'll go with it.
All right, thanks. So is there like if you ever have discussions around like using this as a means of micro-segmentation inside of organizations? Okay.
100%. That's a very strong use case, right? So you want to be able to isolate what, even on the same segment, what traffic is allowed, for a particular host, right? So if you can control that traffic at the network layer. Mainly always control it like closest like to your access layer, right? So if you're able to push down some sort of like access control, you can easily do that, and to provide that level of segmentation, right? So this way, if host A and B are in the same segment, host A cannot communicate to host B if you don't want it to, right?
Okay, gotcha. See, I think Mohammed's got something going on here.
Yeah. So what kind of protocols does it run, like Radius in the background, or any other protocols that are vendor specific as well? Just like Cisco has TechX. So does it support it?
It's a good question, right? So definitely we do SNMP, we do Radius. TechX is actually is actually pushed off to a product called FortiAuthenticator. So all your TACX functionality would be on that. The FortiNAC strictly focuses just on access control, which really would be SNMP, Radius, but also taking in data like through syslog or APIs to take some sort of remediation or action.
Okay. That answers my question, and that comes to another question. About the device administration part. So only FortiAuthenticator looks at the device administration then?
I apologize. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, so only FortiAuthenticator looks after the device authentication. Like, I'm not talking about the user authentication. I'm talking about device authentication. Like, we have hundreds of suppose a customer has hundreds of FortiGates. How does he authenticate how does a administrator or a network admin or a security guy who looks after those FortiGates authenticate into it? So it just uses the FortiAuthenticator. FortiNAC has got nothing to do with it. Is that I'm trying to understand it.
Okay, so for TACX functionality, that would be pushed off to FortiAuthenticator. For Radius functionality, that can be served right through FortiNAC, right? So there is a local Radius server, but for anything TACX functionality, that would be pushed off to FortiAuthenticator. So if you wanted to, I guess your question is, can I do device administration with FortiNAC, right? If you wanted to leverage something like Radius, you could.
Gotcha.
But we'd probably push that off to a FortiAuthenticator like TACX.
Makes sense. How's that, since we're kind of going down that path a little bit, how's it tie into like a FortiSIEM or a syslogging kind of environment? We have the, of course, capabilities to export forward logs.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, but both ways, right? So you can ingest, or we can send logs to a SIEM, right? Whether it's FortiSIEM, but we can also take in logs from a SIEM to basically take some sort of action. So we can filter out those events and then take a particular action, like maybe quarantine a host or shut down a port, etc. Right? So if we identify, if you had, maybe a third-party solution, like an EDR solution, not like FortiEDR could feed into FortiNAC, like directly to its security fabric. But if you had a third-party solution, you can send that information through a SIEM to FortiNAC to take some sort of action.
Okay, I mean, that's very important to kind of point out there. You know, it's like the more that you standardize on the Fortinet fabric, the least hops really you have in order to get the information from point A to point B. But it doesn't limit you, since Fortinet and the SIEM and how you kind of lay that fabric out, that it seems like there's an option to get what you need.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, if you want to follow the cybersecurity mesh architecture, right, Fortinet kind of fits that bill really well, where all of its really services kind of seamlessly talk within its own ecosystem really well. It doesn't mean that it doesn't, right? There's hundreds of fabric partners basically that Fortinet works with, including FortiNAC, right? I find FortiNAC to be very, very much vendor agnostic, so we can basically, take in a ton of information or telemetry to basically take some sort of action on someone's infrastructure.
All right, gotcha. Let's see, so persistent agent and then agentless, we covered that. What are some other key components and options here that we have with FortiNAC that we haven't covered yet that might be important that we should kind of bring to the attention of our listeners?
The captive portal is probably one thing. So a lot of organizations will have third-party contractors come in and basically maybe, provide some sort of maintenance or guidance, right? And then you could use FortiNAC to provide even via VPN, or when they're on premise, right? If they're not identified, FortiNAC will give them a portal, and they can use something called like a dissolvable agent to make sure they meet somewhat of a policy, like, are you up to date on Windows? Do you have at least, AV installed, etc. So you can get on the network securely, and then based upon that, you can integrate that with like FortiGate using like firewall tags. And those firewall tags control where a particular contractor can go to manage or
Interesting.
monitor. So like, for example, maybe a facilities organization, maybe it's a third-party facilities if they're not internal, or even if they are internal, right? They can leverage, they can only manage or access, certain, maybe elements of your HVAC system. So maybe thermostats, etc.
Be like part of the, like you're stating too with the antivirus and everything. It looks like WMI and WinRM are some of the profiling methods there. So they'll check that Windows endpoint, see what's going on with it, make sure they're not on XP still. You just never know. You just never know.
So the discoverable agent will actually identify that if they're running a legacy version of Windows or a version of Windows that doesn't meet your particular compliance policy. And if it doesn't, then you just don't let them on.
Cool. Okay. So I'm reading through some of it myself as we sit here and chat. So looking some of the components here, like the visibility with the network discovery and detection and profiling and classification on the network. So
yeah,
we can do that with a couple different versions here. So that's kind of interesting. I haven't really looked at, or we haven't really covered or chatted about like the different versions of this. So it, kind of up to this point, maybe our listeners are viewing it as like there's just one version, but there looks like there's the base edition, your plus edition, and then the pro edition.
Yeah, so that from a licensing tier point, yes, you're 100% right. There's actually three. I think from a basic standpoint, base does work. I would always try to steer customers to plus or pro, mainly because of really the more advanced .1x features. So if you're looking for to leverage more advanced radius functionality, I would always lean towards plus. But base will get you right, quite a bit, right? For example, MDN integration, right? NAC control, right? So you can definitely get quite a bit. You can still do a lot of control, like using like SNMP. But if you want to send things like maybe out, you want to send events to FortiAnalyzer, right? If you want to have a little more control for VPN, right? If you want to have dissolvable agents, you may want to look at something like, the plus. And then the pro kind of gives you, more where it comes where you can start taking in telemetry. So let's say an organization may have a vulnerability scanner, right? Maybe like, a Tenable, right? Or a Rapid7, for example. Tenable and Qualys I think are native to FortiNAC, but you could take in data from like, for example, like a Rapid7 and then take some sort of action based upon the event data that's sent to FortiNAC.
Yeah, gotcha. So you get the goods with the base edition, but then to really kind of have that segmentation, especially if there's micro-segmentation or the agents or persistent agents are involved, then we're looking at the plus. And then if we really want the incident response, kind of some of the automation capabilities of it, then we're looking at more of the pro.
100%, 100%. I try to like to maybe give an example. So previous background, if you take I kind of like using the convention center as an example, right? Convention centers have like not only wireless, but they have wired, and they have ports everywhere. You ever walk to convention center, see a jack on the wall?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, how many people have actually tried that if it's live or not? Right. So, and then, if it is live, do you think, there's a possibility of having some like network access? Hopefully it's not something that could access an internal network that could be, that needs really, security, right? Hopefully not accessing critical systems, but, it's not uncommon. And I've seen this quite a few times to where you can go into a place and, and connect up, and then you have access to a particular, right? You can have access to many systems in a customer's environment. And then there you go, right? Or in this case, maybe convention center. So NAC in general, but FortiNAC especially, you could start now tying the ports, right? Saying, hey, you can't just connect up here without either getting a particular captive portal, or if it's a convention center, for example, you can actually time base these items to where you shut these ports down where it's not a live event, right? So,
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. That was a
So
good example. Yeah, for sure. It had me thinking about some customers I've walked into, and it's like, for example, at public library, and I can get to the domain controller in their data center over the public Wi-Fi in the data or in the library, and it's just like, oh man. And they've had some issues since then. So this seems like a solution that would have clearly identified that and been able to control and help them out.
yeah, and then of course, I think one of those important is, how do you not just only remediate something, but you have to notify your teams, right? Be mindful of notifying your network teams, your security teams, if they have that many, right? If maybe a lot of the teams are very much, they may wear many hats, but just to be notified, right, on basically a remediation. So you want to notify your, either by text or email or both, saying, hey, this event occurred, right? And if it's really important, if you're a financial institution or you're a hospital, maybe medical, I think I would want to be notified if something's really fishy.
Gotcha. I can uncover a lot. So it looks like there are a decent amount of options and sizes of physical appliances and the virtual machines. There's some recommendations on the number of devices you're anticipating on managing. How does the cloud option kind of stack up? Is it like a bubble of devices that you license, and then you're just allowed to control them at that point?
Oh, so like basically bring your own license, right? So you would basically spin up like NAC, and if you're referring to public cloud, like in AWS or Azure, for example, yeah, you could absolutely do that. Yeah, I think, was that your question?
Yeah.
So the question.
Yeah. Cool. So we're chatting about a little bit before we started recording, but this was, I think there's like 54 Fortinet products right now, maybe 56 in the portfolio with 40 something on it.
So, something like that.
Yeah, I'm in the ballpark. So it's this was one of them that was one of the products that wasn't necessarily developed from the ground up. It was kind of ingested into the portfolio.
Sure.
So they took that Fortinet took that expertise that was already kind of developed, and there's a lot of value in not reinventing the wheel, just kind of putting your spin on it to kind of make it how it is, and then bring it into that fabric. So how many years do you think, ballparking, was this kind of in motion beforehand? Since the beginning of NAC, 15 years that we have in the development of this product line?
Oh, for sure. I think even longer. I think 2000 actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's been quite a while. Yes. So.
I mean, and that's kind of important. That it's not just like something that was whipped up overnight by any means. It's gone through a lot of cycles with the maturity of the offering itself, and then kind of here we are today with something that's, from what we were chatting about before we started recording again. This seems like back in 2000, for example, it would have been pretty difficult to stand up something like this, and be able to control it and understand the flows and everything. And Fortinet's really taken leaps and bounds to kind of simplify that. So bringing that almost technology that you have to have, because this is like I refer to a lot of the ADCs and stuff from other vendors. It's kind of like Swiss Army knives. So this seems like one of the Swiss Army knife kind of capable technologies. Once you have it inside of your environment, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's really hard to say you can't do something when you have a technology like this stood up inside of your environment. It seems like so many options here.
I actually have to agree with you on that. I definitely would consider it like a Swiss Army knife. The fact that especially the fact that it's very much, vendor agnostic, right? It's probably one of, I think it's a huge strong point in comparison to, its other competitors, right? Where it's very, very, vendor friendly, right? So it integrates really well with, it doesn't have to be, not everything will be one particular vendor. So the ability to kind of leverage that, another vendors maybe security infrastructure with FortiNAC, then just it increases the level of security posture that an organization may need. One thing maybe before we kind of end it is one of the requirements for NAC, and I'm seeing more and more, is like related to cybersecurity insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly becoming more of a requirement. So NAC being a really strong resource to fulfill that requirement for cybersecurity insurance is becoming more and more known, right? So especially to meet some minimum requirements for like a security posture.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point, because that does come up a lot, and depending on the requirements that you have with your NIST standards, and or if you're up against a CMMC requirement, you got an audit coming down the path here shortly. You got some cleanup to do. This would be a nice stride that you could take with this technology stack to, uncover a lot of those components. You'd hate to be in the middle of an assessment and somebody, do you even know that you had that subnet? Like, oh, you know what? No, I didn't. So this could actually save you from a little bit of embarrassment out there as well. So,
or that device.
Yeah, or that device. You need to know it's out there. Could be the Achilles heel of your network. Interesting. Oh, very cool.
By all means, I mean, if you're listening to have any other questions, feel free to reach out to your yourself, right? Or
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, typically, we don't go in this alone, so we'll bring the whole Fortinet team with us. If you got any questions about it, definitely reach out to your local XenTegra client executive, and we'll wrap it up here. I think this is a good overview on kind of just some of the general ideas and components of the FortiNAC technology stack here. And now it can help organizations, small and large, gain some control, bring those reins in, and be successful at those audits that you may or may not have. And if you don't have them today, good for you. But you never know about tomorrow. You never know what tomorrow will bring.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So yeah, Jason, thank you very, very much for helping uncover demystify this solution a little bit for us. So again, if you got any questions, let us know. Thanks to Mohammad as well, and for joining us, and Dave Wynegar. He had to drop off. He had an emergency he had to run to, but maybe we can dig into this a little bit deeper. I'm sure as I'm progressing through my NSE 4 here, to start stepping up to some of the more specialization areas, then I'm sure I'll have more questions about this, because this is a really cool option. I don't know how anybody wouldn't benefit from this technology in their environment.
Yeah,
so thanks for being here.
You said it best, man. It's a Swiss Army knife.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jason, and we'll catch up with you guys soon.
All right, take care.
You do the same.
Jason and Chris.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Have a good one, guys. Bye.